Tonight, I want us to hear the questions that God asks of Job. Remember that in this long journey through the book of Job that we began back in June of 2020, we've been hearing Job respond to his situation, hearing his friends respond to his situation. And over and again, what we've heard is Job's consistent complaint is that God has not spoken. God hasn't addressed his situation. And his friends rise up and they've told him, Job, you're responsible for your situation. You've sinned and brought all this down upon yourself. And Job has continued to say, I haven't done anything. I haven't sinned in any particular way that's warranted this sort of judgment against my life. And Job has called upon God to speak. He said, listen, I will make my complaint or my address, and then God, you can respond to me. Or God, I'm glad to listen to you, and then I'll respond to you. But I need you to speak. And as we've journeyed through this, one of the things we've taken note of is that in terms of the argument style of this time period, the fact that God hasn't audibly spoken seems to leave Job on the hook for his situation. And so what Job is really wanting is vindication. He wants God to arise and to say, Job, you're not responsible for this. You haven't brought this on yourself. He wants God to let him off the hook. Job has been listening for some time now to yet another friend, as we've heard Elihu come to the fore and give his 4 speeches. And one of the things that differs or separates Elihu from the other friends of Job is that he is more discerning. He seems to provide some nuance to this situation that we've not yet heard. Remember that God can handle whatever it is that we need to throw at him, whatever questions that we have, concerns that we have, God can handle that. But one of the things that Elihu teaches us is that when we recognize that we've crossed the line in our dealings with the Lord, we need to repent. We need to humble ourselves before him, confess that sin, acknowledge that we haven't taken note of God's power and dominion and authority. And Elihu has been saying to Job, the real reason that this difficulty is going on is because you've crossed the line, you've stepped beyond it. God has been trying to communicate to you. He's been trying to get you to understand that you've got this weakness in your life. There's this spot in your life where you're not going to be successful in serving the Lord because you're going to become too prideful. You're going to diminish God's power in your life. You're just not going to take note of God's use of difficulty in you. And so you're going to cross that line. And Job, God's trying to get your attention. Remember, one of the things Elihu has taught Job is that God uses other forms of speech other than just audibly communicating. And remember, he says that God speaks in visions, in night dreams. He comes to us and he presents these powerful words to us in these visions that we sometimes have. He says that God speaks through experiences of difficulty and pain and hardship. God is speaking in those things. So one of the things Elihu's underscoring for us and for Job is that where Job has been saying, God isn't speaking, God isn't saying anything about my situation, Elihu would respond and say, actually, God's been speaking all the time. He's been speaking through your pain, through your difficulty, through your loss, through your hardship. And that's one of those things that's difficult for us to bear, to think that is how God would speak to us. Reminds me of the song that Laura Story wrote called Blessings. What if your blessings come through raindrops? And what if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? What if my greatest disappointments and the failures of this life are what it takes to reveal a thirst this world can't satisfy? What if the trials of this life are just your mercies in disguise? Some of us have lived long enough and experienced enough difficulty to know that God's mercies actually do come in the form of great hardships and great personal tragedies, even though that's not really what we often are taught to think about the way that God relates to us in the world. Job has wanted God to speak, and now God rises and he speaks. So let's read together chapter 38 and chapter 39. It's lengthy, but it really all goes together, and then we'll walk through it. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched a line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb, when I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here you shall your proud waves be stayed? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light, and where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, where I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain, and a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass? Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazareth in their season? Or can you guide the bear with its children? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can tilt the waterskins of the heavens, when the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick fast together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions, when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their thicket? Who provides for the raven its prey, when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for a lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch, bring forth their offspring, and are delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and do not return to them. Who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom have I given the arid plain for his home, and the salt land for his dwelling place? He scorns the tumult of the city. He hears not the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after everything, every green thing. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you depend on him because his strength is great? And will you leave to him your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but they are the pinions and plumage of love. For she leaves her eggs to the earth and lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them and that the wild beast may trample them. She deals cruelly with her young as if they were not hers, though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear, because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and its rider. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattled the quiver, the flashing spear and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? On the rock he dwells and makes his home, on the rocky crag and stronghold. From there he spies out their prey. His eyes behold it from afar away. His young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is. Then read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 40. And the Lord said to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." Father, help us to listen to the word of the Lord, to consider the grandeur of our Creator, to recognize the wonder of the one who not only made us, but knows us inside and out. To see that you are a God who is intimately involved with your world. Because of that, we need not question. We need not doubt. We need not wonder if you are there, for you are, ordering all things, even our paths of pain, in accordance with your will. Help us to walk in faith in you. We pray it in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. So we'll try to break back into our sort of old format of being down here. And so let me just begin by asking what stands out to you from these two chapters as we start to think about them. What stands out? Sir?
God's in control.
God's in control. Okay. What else?
All nature.
All nature is his. That's right.
Who are we to question him?
Who are we to question him? Anything else? Let me ask you this. What did you notice as there was a description of God's authority over the world? What do you notice about his knowledge of creation?
I think it just scratches the surface.
Okay. Just scratches the surface.
He made it all.
He made it all. Yeah. So one of the things that stands out to me as we read through this and see God speaking to Job about his knowledge of the creation is that God is intimately involved with the world that he created. Down to the grandest detail, God knows we see all sorts of things that are under his authority, don't we? So when we begin in chapter 38, one of the first things that God calls to Job's mind is this business of the creation itself, creating the physical world in which we dwell. God wants to know, Job, where were you when the foundations of the world were laid? Let's go that far back. Let's go back to the beginning of the world itself. You seem to have authority. You seem to speak with such knowledge on these things. Where were you then? Do you know how the foundations were made? Do you know how the world came into being? Do you know all the precise measurements and all the intricate details? As God is expounding upon the creation, he says to Job, where were you in terms of the boundaries that were placed upon the waters, when they were contained up in the clouds, when they were given boundaries on the land and sea? Where were you, Job? So God takes us back to the beginning, and he demonstrates that his authority over creation doesn't just begin once the world exists. He's not just a caretaker. He is the creator. He's the one who brought the world into being. God says to Job in chapter 38, verses 12 to 15, he says, do you know about the ordering of the sun? Are you there to cause it to dawn each morning? Do you know about all that precise work that has to go on? He says there, have you commanded the morning since your days began? Cause the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal. Its features stand out like a garment from the wicked. Their light is withheld and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you commanded the morning, Job? Job is being challenged here by God. He's being caused to examine the pride and the perhaps arrogance that has been a part of his speech. And God is challenging him to think, you think you know a lot. You think that you possess all this knowledge, but you really don't. Not when it comes to it, not when it gets to the real running of the world. God challenges Job in verses 16 to 18 do you know about the real breadth of the earth? Do you know its magnitude? Do you know how grand it is? Job, you live in this one little spot in the world, and your world is rather large because you've been a big man. You had a lot of authority. You had a lot of resources. You had a lot of respect. But even at your height, even in the prime of life, even in that place where you walked before my face, Job, you were still just a speck in the larger story of creation. You don't really understand its magnitude. You don't understand all the grandeur of the world, all the breadth and length and height and depth of the world itself. You don't know the great recesses. You don't know the vast expanse. Consider that. He asked Job in verses 22 to 24, where do we store light and wind and snow and hail? Here he begins to say to Job, I want you to think beyond the physical world itself, not just the created globe upon which you walk, but let's go beyond that. Let's go to the things that make the earth function, that cause the earth to experience growth and productivity. Let's go to those things that I use in order not only to demonstrate my grace, but also to demonstrate my control. Job, in your vast understanding of the world, have you ever been to the storehouses of snow? Have you ever seen the place where I keep the hail hidden? Have you ever been where the lightning is shut up until I send it thundering upon the earth? Can you imagine that? I know that we live in a world that's scientific and wants to have a good explanation for everything. There are good explanations for things, but Can we just step back and think about the Creator talking about His world, His authority and His control and His dominion over the world, and how He uses weather in order to accomplish His purposes, in order to demonstrate His grace, in order to effect correction in the lives of people? And can we just for a moment realize that every snowflake and every drop of hail and every bit of rain that we catch in our gauges, it all comes from the hand of the Lord? You and I, we think it's just maybe a part of a natural process, and God says, it's a process I put into place. It's something I control. I have dominion. I have authority over it. When we have a week, look at verses 28 through 30. In chapter 38, he says, has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. That's the kind of question you ask when you have a snow day like we did a few weeks ago, when things get icy and when a few snowflakes begin to fall, and you walk outside and you take a look at this and you think, oh, well, this is nice. This is a nice winter wonderland, but as a child of God and as a believer in His authority over the created world, one of the things we ought to do is just stop and remember that all of this is ordered by Him. That He's in control, He has dominion, He has authority, He sent this to us, He caused this to happen, it's here by divine command.
We could be you're saying we're scientific, and we are, but we could be just stupid as heck as Joey. We think we know it.
Absolutely. We could, I love that. We could be just as stupid as Job is. We often are, I think, probably just as stupid as Job is in some ways. And what is the great failure here? What is God getting at? What God is getting at is that Job has assumed that because God's audible voice has not thundered forth in his life, that somehow God must be off duty, God must be absent at the helm, God must have shirked His responsibility and left him in this, in a lurch, so to speak. And so here is God saying, I haven't gone anywhere. Right? You think you understand what the world is. Let me tell you, I possess the real knowledge. I have the real authority. I know what's really going on in the world. In all of these questions that God is asking of Job, he shifts. He's talked about the foundation of the world. He's talked about the things that cause the world to spin and to function and to experience life and growth. And then God begins to talk about the things that inhabit His world. Mary Ray's dad, he says that his favorite question that God asks of Job is, have you ever played midwife to a mountain goat? That's a great summary of chapter 39 and verse 1. Have you ever played midwife to a mountain goat? Job is asked here in chapter 39 and verse 1, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Do you know the time when they give birth, when they crouch, bring forth their offspring, and are delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and do not return to them. God says, Job, let's start thinking about the created world, all the things that inhabit this world that I've made. You think you know so much. You think you have so much authority. Do you really know about these things? Have you played midwife to a mountain goat? Do you know all the birthing processes, all the timing of all of these animals that give birth? Can you see when they're just about? Now, some of you've got a lot of agricultural experience. You might be able to know. You might have enough experience. You could know when the calving is about to happen. Maybe of certain animals.
But He set a time frame for all this. The Lord did. Time,
Wayne said He set a time frame for all this. That's it. That is one of the things. We'll come down here in a minute and talk about some of the things God teaches us here. But that's one of the things that's being demonstrated, is that all of these occurrences in the created order have not happened by happenstance, right? They're not outside of God's control. God is saying, just like Wayne said, God is saying, I put my mark on this. I know this inside and out. You think you know a lot. I know it all. Right? I can look at this animal and I know when they're going to get in the pasture. I know when they're going to find their cover. I know when they're going to ensure that their calf comes into life. I know how that process is going to take place. He says, I know it so much. I know what it looks like when they crouch to push that baby out. I know all about it. I know it inside and out. Job, do you know about that? Right? He goes on and he talks about the domestication of animals. Here's an interesting subject. He asks Job, he says, listen, do you know about the wild donkey and the wild ox? Do you have any sort of control over them? He says in 5 through 8, who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I have given the arid plain for his home and the salt land for his dwelling place. He says, you see that animal out there roaming free. You see him wild. And you think, well, that's just a wild animal. He doesn't have a maker. He doesn't have a Lord. There's nothing over him. There's nothing controlling him. But I am. Just because he doesn't have a master who ties him up in a barn and uses him as a beast of burden doesn't mean that he is outside of control, that he's outside of order. I've got him. I'm the one who controls him. He says about the ox in verse 9, is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes? Will he harrow the valleys after you? In other words, Job, do you have such power, such dominion, such authority in the world that you can go out there and take this wild animal and make him a beast of burden that's not going to fight you, break loose, go free again? I don't think you can, but I can. He does my bidding. He hears my voice and he responds. He doesn't depend upon you, but he does depend upon me.
Gandy, what I get out of this, and it may not be what anybody else is getting, but it's like balance. A balance of nature. God is even in control of the balance of nature, the predator, the prey, everything. And I think that's what he's trying to get across to Job. Like you said, most people, you look out there and you see wild donkey. Yeah. Well, you don't fit. That's so far away from you most of the time. You don't think about God having balance and order in the wild animal kingdom. So that's what I'm getting at.
So Sherry's talking about the balance that God brings into the world. He's in control of all sides of things. You talked about the fact about the predator and the prey. He asks that at the end of chapter 38 about the lion and about the raven. And he says, Job, are you the one that goes out there and ensures that lion is able to catch prey in order to feed its young? Are you the one who ensures that when those little ravens cry out for food, that their mother is able to secure prey for them so that they have something to eat? And God is saying, I'm in all of that. I'm in all the intricacy of that detail. I'm ensuring that all those pieces and parts arrive at the right place at the right time in order to accomplish my will and in order to make the world go round. To borrow, it really is a circle of life, but it's not a circle of life without someone in charge, right? The world is ordered, and it is ordered by the Creator God, who also is our Redeemer. I think that's great. Look at what he says in 13 through 18. He talks here about the ostrich, and his summary of the ostrich is this. The ostrich has all of these feathers, but they're just for looks. They're just for show. And he says the ostrich is not a good mother. It puts its egg down in the dirt, and it can be trampled and squashed and crushed. He says the ostrich is not much to deal with. It's actually kind of a pain. If you try to deal with it, it's going to get you. That long neck's going to come looking for you and bite you in the backside. But then notice what he says. Verse 17. God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. He says, it is by design that this is a dumb bird. But then he says in 18, when she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and its rider. In other words, you and I look at that ostrich and we say, what is she worth? She's not a good mama. All of her feathers are just for looks. She doesn't act very intelligent. She's there to harass us. But then when she takes off running, the glory of God is put on display. The grandeur of his might, the wonder of his power is put on display right there as that ostrich goes running, passing the horse and its rider. He asked in 19, do you give the horse his might? That question implies that someone has. That question implies that the horse derives its power, its strength, its prowess from someone other than himself. It didn't happen by chance or happenstance. This is not something that has just occurred as the result of long supernatural processes outside of the hand of a creator God. God is asking Job, did you give the horse his might? And the implication is, no, you didn't, I did. I gave him his might. I made him beautiful. I caused him to have this powerful roar. That terrifying snort of the horse is something that I put there. He says in 22 that he laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattled the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. In other words, the horse in all of its power and its majesty and its grandeur, it is not undone by the tasks that it's used for. The horse is used as a beast of war. People get on it, they manipulate it, they bring all of their weaponry to bear upon it. They go marching into battle upon it, and yet the horse isn't undone by that. He knows what he's going to see, but he's up to the task because I made him this way. He asks in 26 through 30, is it by your understanding that the hawk soars? In other words, Job, did you teach the hawk how to fly? Did you teach the eagle to go put its nest high above the rocky crag? Did you teach him to spy there upon his prey so that he can feed his young? And God in these questions has asked Job to consider where he was when the foundations of the world were created. Consider his role in determining the magnitude of the world in which we live. Consider his authority in not only knowing the location, but in dispatching the weather to accomplish its purpose. Consider his place in relation to all of these created beings that fill and populate the earth. And as God asks all these things, he can only come down to this question: shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? In other words, Job, you've long been telling me how much I've failed you. How much I failed you in causing you to lose your fortune. How much I failed you in causing you to lose your children. How much I failed you in causing you to endure all of this horrific pain. How much I failed you in failing to vindicate you in your timetable. Job, you've been telling me how I've failed you because you think that you know the world better than I do. You think that you possess more knowledge about creation than I do. You think that because things haven't worked out according to your timetable and in accordance with your plan for how the world works, that somehow I'm in the wrong here. But Job, I'm here to tell you, you don't understand everything. There are a lot of things that you don't know. It's sort of like, being children. And Mama and Daddy, they ask us to do a certain task. They give us an order. They set out a way for us to be. And we presume that that they're just dumb and they don't know anything and they're wrong about this. We know how we ought to live. We know what would be the best way. We know what brings us pleasure and fulfillment and enjoyment in life. And so from about age 13 to about age 25, nobody can tell us anything. We're ignorant. We act in the way that seems right in our own eyes. We go around saying, I wish that my parents were just with it. I wish they understood. And then all of a sudden something kicks in. That little bit of how God designed us kicks in around age 25. And all of a sudden, where our parents were wrong. Now they're right. And we come to understand we didn't know everything. It's that way in our relationship with God. Like Job, we get in these pits. We get down in these bits of difficulty. We get in these hard places and we think we know everything and we don't know everything. And actually one of the reasons that God takes us to these low points is in order to teach us just what we don't know. I want you to note 6 things that God teaches us in these chapters as we think about the significance of God's questions. Number 1, God teaches us that He laid the foundations of the world. He laid the foundations of the world. That may seem so elementary, but I think in 2021, when all sorts of theories abound about how the world came into being and how we got to where we are, I think it's good for us just to remind ourselves of this foundational truth that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's fundamental to everything we believe. I consistently have understood and continue to say that if you get God wrong on creation, you will get Him wrong on redemption. They cannot be separated. It all falls apart. The story of grace falls apart if you don't go back to the beginning and believe God at His first act that we know of, which is to create the heavens and the earth. God has laid the foundations of the world. Number 2, God teaches us in these chapters that He orders all things in effort to magnify His power and accomplish His purpose. He orders all things in an effort to magnify His power and accomplish His purpose. God is chiefly concerned with putting His glory on display. And you and I may look at that and we may question, well, how is that right? It's right because He's God. It's right because He's infinitely holy, absolutely just, perfect in all of His ways. His attributes and perfections go on and on and on. Sometimes we may wonder, what is this? A God who is centered on Himself, a God who is so focused on His own glory that He intends for all of creation to bow at His knee. But in order to ask that question, you have to deny that God is worthy of that kind of attention and that kind of glory. He is worthy. He is worthy of dominion. He's worthy of authority. He is worthy of power. He is worthy of praise. He's worthy of glory. He's worthy of worship. He is worthy because in and of Himself, He is altogether righteous and true and honorable and just and pure and holy. He is God and we are not. And the great plan of God is to put His glory on display in creation. His long intent is that the world would be covered with His glory as the waters cover the sea. He intends that all the glory of the nations are going to be brought into His kingdom. And so right here, one of the things that God teaches us is that He orders all things in an effort to magnify His power, to demonstrate, to intensely show us His strength and His glory, and to accomplish His purpose. That means that the smallest things, like the lightning striking this tree on this side of the road, but missing that tree on that side of the road, that is by His hand. It means this. When you and I look at it and we say, well, God's hand was upon us and he protected us from that storm, that is absolutely true. But it also means that if we go through the storm, his hand was there as well. And it was a part of his intent for us to endure that hardship and difficulty. It means that in the intricate details of the calving of a dough, God's order is on display. He knows that. He designed that. He created that. He's causing that, accomplishing that. And it means that all of these created orders come together in the confluence of his will in order to accomplish his purpose, in order to do what magnifies him the most. That's why we can have confidence that when we do go through hardship and suffering, it is not outside of his control. Actually, it's being used by him in order to accomplish what he desires in our lives. God laid the foundations of the world. God orders all things in effort to magnify his power and accomplish his purpose. Number 3, I want you to remember that God cares deeply for the natural world. He is not an absent owner. He is a faithful steward of all he has. God is not an absent owner. He cares deeply for the natural world. Now, why does that matter? Why does it matter that we know God cares about when the wildflowers come into bloom? Why does it matter that we know God cares about where the raven is going to find its food for its young? Why does it matter that we know that God cares about the seasons changing in their order? It matters because all of these things point to his deep care for us. In order to know that, you only have to go to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and remember that if he has clothed the lilies of the field and if he has fed the birds in their nests, how much more will he care for us? God's order and careful stewardship over the world that he has created, over the natural course of creation, is proof positive of his care for us. Number 4, God teaches us here that he purposefully designed aspects of creation to astound and amaze us, thereby pointing us to him. God purposefully designed aspects of creation to astound and amaze us, thereby pointing us to him. We all have the parts of nature we love. Right? Maybe you love to go to the beach. You want some time down at the Gulf Coast on the most beautiful beaches in the world. At least that's what all the admin in Pensacola told us my whole life growing up. Maybe you love to go to the mountains and Chattanooga and Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and Asheville and, well, not Asheville here, Asheville, North Carolina, right? You love to go to the mountains. Although, I don't know, there's some scenes in St. Clair County, they're just about as good in the fall as anything you can see in the Smoky Mountains. Maybe your thing is to go and travel out west and you see the Great Plains, and maybe you've been to the Grand Canyon and beheld that vast wonder. Maybe you've been to the Tetons. Maybe you just walk out in the yard. You don't have to go anywhere, but in the wintertime when you plant those bulbs, and then in the spring when they begin to bloom and blossom, the glory of God is put on display in your presence. And you're forced to know his power, his dominion, his authority. He's here. 2 years now, and I guess, as long as I'm here, I'm going to take note of this. But about the end of August, on Wednesday nights, I go to the door and I just stand out and I look at this mountain behind us. And I start watching. And I watch it every week to see how much color there is. And I know how fast it progresses. And it's amazing how slow it starts and how quickly it finishes. And right there in the heart of St. Clair County, you don't have to go anywhere. It's free. the glory of God is put on display on that glorious ridge. As what has long been green and verdant begins to change and becomes auburn and crimson and golden. And my goodness, if you come down the prison road at the right time of day and catch that ridge in early September with the golden hour sun hitting upon it, it's brilliant. And it's a proof of his power and his prominence in our lives. He has designed creation to astound and amaze us in order to point us to him.
Pastor Gandy,
Yes, ma'am.
what you're saying about, you can't separate, if you deny the creation, you have to deny salvation. Don't you think that maybe Satan has convinced all these people about the Big Bang Theory?
Well, I think that's certainly a large part of it. And, I think part of what we see, you just go to Romans chapter 1 and see what Paul says about what we tend to do with the creation. So it's because we're sinners, because we're fallen, we tend, outside of redemption, outside of grace, we will tend to look at creation and do worship and serve the creation rather than the Creator. Creation is here to point us to the Creator, but instead we pervert that and we begin to worship and serve the creation itself. And I think that is the ultimate idolatry. That goes right back to the fundamental issue of denying that the world was brought into being by God. But absolutely, I think that the enemy uses all sorts of things, and that's one of them, to deny God's creative power. And that plays out in all sorts of ways. If you can deny the Creator and deny his authority in creation, then all sorts of things fall apart. The created order in terms of our gender falls apart. The created order in terms of his purpose for the family falls apart. The created order in terms of our dominion over beasts falls apart. The created order in terms of our authority over the land to work and till the land falls apart. Everything becomes topsy-turvy if we deny the Creator, right? So it absolutely does. And so that's why Cynthia's right. The enemy goes right back to the first doctrine of creation, and he fights there. He denies that reality, because if he can break us there, then he's got us, right? He causes every other aspect of our faith to begin to crumble. Number 5. I'll make this one quick because I've already said this, but God, who cares about this world, this natural world, this deeply, cares even more about mankind because we bear his image. God, who cares this deeply about the natural world, cares even more about mankind because we bear his image. So there's the link. Why does Jesus teach us that if he cares for the birds of the air, if he cares for these lilies of the field, then how much more does he care for us? Well, it's because we bear his image in the world. It's because his imprint is upon us. It's one of the reasons, just a side comment, it's one of the reasons that we ought to take seriously and think carefully about how we interact with one another, because every one of us is an image bearer. We reflect a piece of who God is. Not perfectly, but we reflect his image. His imprint is upon us. And so when we sin against each other in the way that maybe we deal harshly with each other, then we've really sinned against God himself. Let me tell you the last thing I think God teaches us here. God's power displayed in the created world underscores that mankind is out of place in challenging him. God's power displayed in the created world underscores that mankind is out of place in challenging him. One of the things that Job is having to learn is just how little he knows, just how great his God is, just how small he is. Job is having to learn the lesson that we all have to learn in our lives, and that is that just because we don't understand, and just because we don't agree, And just because we would rather that God's story for our lives worked out in a different way doesn't mean that God's wrong. In fact, God is never wrong. Everything he does is right. I encourage you, I think I've said this before, but if you have never heard this or read the lyrics of this old hymn, you need to look this up. Whatever my God ordains is right. Look that hymn up. It is fundamental to my understanding of God's order in my life, in all of our lives. I think it preaches a foundational message from Scripture. Whatever God ordains in your life and in my life, it's right. If you don't believe that, if you don't have that as a foundational truth in your life, then you're going to question everything God does. You're going to doubt his will and way. You're going to run from his chastening, correcting hand. You're going to doubt his tender mercies and his great, faithful love. You've got to settle in your heart that God is always right in what he does in your life, whether you understand it or agree with it or not. We're always out of place in questioning God. Now, I continue to say, and I'm going to say this till the end, does that mean that if you question God, he's going to destroy you? No, because he doesn't destroy Job. He chastens him. He corrects him. He causes him to be humbled before him. He conveys to him the fact that he's crossed the line into sinful pride. But God doesn't destroy Job just because he asks questions. I think one of the comforting things about this whole study is the fact that God can handle whatever we throw at him. God can handle our questions. He can handle our ignorance. He can handle our doubts. And the way that he handles it is by striving with us and then by teaching us. There's a lot of things we don't know. And causing us to come to this place of understanding, we really are out of place when we question him. That's a learned lesson. It's one thing to say it. It's one thing to believe it. It's a whole other thing to live it. When you're down in the difficulty and the hardship, when God's brought you to your path of personal pain, it's hard to remember that. That it's not my place to question God, that God does have a way and a will that's at work here to accomplish his purpose. And part of his purpose is to conform me to the image of his son, Jesus Christ. And sometimes that takes the hard things. But as we live that and learn that, we come to embrace it. Because God is infinite in all his ways, perfect in all of his attributes, and everything he does is right. Father, thank you for this day that you've given to us. Thank you for the time that we've had to think together upon your word. Thank you for this long journey through Job. I'm better. I'm better for having studied this book. I pray others are as well. I pray, Holy Father, that you would use your word as we study in all sorts of ways, in our Sunday school time, in morning worship, in this Bible study time, Wednesday night, on our personal studies. I pray we wouldn't just be taking in more and more of the word as information, but that we would be transformed by it. Help us, Father, this week to walk faithfully before you, to serve you, to speak your truth, your grace to people who are in need. We pray these things in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.